to extend the food emergency bill. And no end to the battle to extinguish wildfires in Paraguay, but still no ranchers have been charged for starting them. Hello and welcome to Telesur English. I am Estefania Bravo. This is from the South. Students have taken to the streets in Venezuela to condemn the threat of attacks from Colombia. Members of the Venezuelan Socialist Party youth and other social movements marched through the center of Caracas to the presidential palace. They expressed support for Venezuela's sovereignty and for the military exercises ordered by President Nicolás Maduro along the border with Colombia. They said President Iván Duque has been seeking a pretext to attack Venezuela. Our correspondent, Leonel Retamal, is at the march in Caracas with more details.
We are here at the march which is making its way through the streets of Caracas. It is making the 11th anniversary of the youth wing of the United Socialist Party of Venezuela. It was created in 2008 by President Hugo Chavez to develop young leaders to strengthen the Bolivarian revolution. The young people here are involved in many different areas of political and social activity. They say this is a march for peace and against the sanctions and blockade imposed on Venezuela. They are emphasizing their message of peace to coincide with the military exercises underway on the border with Colombia for the various acts that we know have taken place there, trying to provoke some kind of conflict. They are expressing their solidarity and friendship with the people of Colombia. They say they are the generation of the future, and although they have had to confront the most difficult situation yet with the economic blockade, they insist they remain committed to the Bolivarian revolution, and they will continue to study and mobilize to carry this process forward.
Venezuela's foreign minister has strongly condemned sanctions imposed by the U.S. against several countries. Speaking at the United Nations in Geneva, Jorge Arreaza called for the creation of a treaty to defend the UN Charter, which prohibits the imposition of unilateral sanctions.
Last year, Alfred de Zayas, the then independent UN expert on the promotion of democratic and equitable international order, said the coercive unilateral measures against Venezuela is a crime against humanity. Iran's foreign minister called them measures of economic terrorism, and we agree with them on this. We insist they are criminal. Cuba has calculated the cost of the blockade for the past 60 years to almost $1 trillion. Those countries, our countries, should be compensated, as recommended by several bodies within this commission.
Venezuela has announced a decision taken on Wednesday by a small group of OES member governments to attempt to activate the Inter-American Treaty of Reciprocal Assistance, or TR. Venezuela's government says this is a disastrous imperial instrument and that those countries are acting on behalf of the United States. And Mexico, whose delegation was present at the meeting of the Organization of American States, is expressing deep concern and categorically rejects the invocation of the TR. Mexico has said that it will condemn any decision taken through the use of force. Trump's decision to drop his security advisor John Bolton has raised questions about whether the United States foreign policy will change. Alina Duarte reports.
Donald Trump has confirmed once again the differences he had with his former national security advisor, John Bolton.
John is somebody that I actually got along with very well. He made some very big mistakes. When he talked about the Libyan model for Kim Jong-un, that was not a good statement to make. You just take a look at what happened with Gaddafi. That was not a good statement to make, and it set us back. And frankly, he wanted to do things not necessarily tougher than me. You know, John's known as a tough guy. He's so tough he got us into Iraq. That's tough.
There are some who celebrate the firing of someone who started the war in Iraq.
He is a very dangerous person for foreign policy, and we believe it's time to pressure the White House for negotiations and to consider non-violent solutions instead of militarism, which was Bolton's policy.
Meanwhile, different countries are asking themselves, what could this move mean?
Regarding their political point of views, we did not agree with the majority of them. They have an approved style based on force and military methods. Will as external policies change? I heard yesterday that Mike Pompeo said there won't be any changes. Let's see what happens. Then we will see if there is any change or not.
Donald Trump said he disagreed with Bolton's methods on Venezuela.
I disagreed with John Bolton on his attitudes on Venezuela. I thought he was way out of line, and I think I've proven to be right. But we are always watching Venezuela very, very closely.
But it's not only the White House that is against Venezuela. The Organization of American States approved a resolution to convoke an organ of consultation of the Inter-American Treaty of Reciprocal Assistance, which is a pretext for a military intervention in Venezuela. And although the Mexican government is not part of that treaty, it objected to the resolutions, arguing that the approved resolutions are not only unacceptable, but against international law.
The departure of John Bolton has been welcomed by some of the oil-producing countries meeting in the United Arab Emirates. The OPEC ministerial meeting is reviewing the cut in production agreed between OPEC and non-OPEC producers. The ministers reported that overall commitments under the agreement have been more than met, even though Iraq and Nigeria have not been able to comply fully. The panel is being chaired by Venezuela's oil minister, Manuel Quevedo, who lamented the impact on the oil market of U.S. sanctions like those promoted by John Bolton.
There are always advisors who want to impose their views. Corrections to that are always beneficial, especially if there are real changes that will allow the peoples of the world to pursue their development. That is very welcomed. And we hope that by the end of 2019, we will have good news, with a return of full stability. We don't want sanctions and economic warfare in any country to affect something as important as the world oil market and its benefits for the people.
The lower house in Argentina has given initial approval to an extension of the food emergency law demanded by social movements. Protesters gathered outside the Congress as the debate took place. The bill was passed by 222 votes in favor and none against. It means the food emergency will be extended to the 31st of December 2022. And it mandates the government to increase funding for the emergency food program every 3 months. Shortly after the vote, the police used force against a group, including women and children, who were demanding more food supplies. Our correspondent, Sabrina Roth, got caught up in the repression.
Moments of high tension here in Buenos Aires, where the police have used pepper spray against demonstrators outside the Social Development Ministry. They came here to demand food supplies for the community kitchens and more support for the increasing number of unemployed. This has been clearly excessive use of force. There are mothers with children here, just asking for a bowl of food, and you can see how they are treated.
We thank Sabrina for that report. Cuba's President Miguel Díaz-Canel has announced measures to be taken amid the energy situation in the country. Cuba is seeing increased threats by Washington, which is intensifying unilateral measures. Díaz-Canel informed citizens about the tense fuel situation as the U.S. blockade is preventing the arrival of fuel in Cuba. Shipping companies, insurance companies, and governments are all being threatened by Washington to prevent fuel from reaching the island. The situation has produced a diesel shortage, which could affect freight transport. There may also be effects on the power grid. The president says if they can lower the use around peak times, blackouts can be avoided.
Today we can say that the measures that have been ordered by the ministries, we can say with certainty, with high probability, that until Sunday we can be sure we won't have blackouts. If something is to happen, it is because of some other complication. And I also want people to not get confused. At times there are blackouts that don't have anything to do with this situation. They are caused by damages. That sometimes people think that when something turns off for any reason, people begin to say that the blackouts have begun. We are going to have an information plan about the blackouts, and also we are going to try to dispute those blackouts so the effects for the people be minimized.
Coming up after the break, Ecuadorian paraplegic athlete achieves a goal of climbing Africa's highest mountain on a handbike. Don't go away.
A review of the world news that investigates, incites analysis, and induces criticism. Because every event...
Work intensified at the Nupona Ranch, 20 kilometers from the center of Bahia Negra, where the military are trying to put 3 big blazes. There's been a noticeable lack of volunteer firefighters. There's also no sign of the environmental prosecutors team, who were assigned 3 weeks ago to verify if the fires were started deliberately by cattle ranchers. And we have heard nothing about their investigations or any charges being brought in such cases. Let's remember that around 69,000 hectares have been affected so far, according to the National Forest Institute's last reports. So we are still waiting for volunteer firefighters to arrive here in Bahia Negra. And there are not only wildfires here in the western region, but also reports of huge fires in the Salto de Guairá region on the border with Bolivia.
The number of people reported missing in the Bahamas after being displaced by Hurricane Dorian has dropped to 1,300. On Wednesday, the missing persons list stood at 2,500. Spokesperson for the National Emergency Management Agency, NEMA, Carl Smith, confirmed that the people flagged as missing were safely housed at shelters.
We are happy to announce that the number of missing persons registered with the government is going down daily. After beginning the process of cross-referencing the different databases, and you would have heard from Ms. Curry of the Bahamas Red Cross that they are also collecting data. So after cross-referencing these databases, the registered persons who have evacuated the islands are now at 1,300. persons, and this is down from the 2,500 persons that I reported yesterday.
This process is slow. We haven't made much progress from the 50 that we give you, and we will continue to do our very best. And major disasters, such as the magnitude of what went through in the Abacos and the Grand Bahama, it's going to take a long time before you can really say numbers. And you may never get the amount of numbers, but we have to do all within our power to make sure that we do our best and try to bring resolve to this issue.
Bahamas Prime Minister Hubert Minnis has said that the government will now focus on the recovery and the stabilization mission in the aftermath of Hurricane Dorian.
Hurricane Dorian affected the northern western Bahama Islands for an approximate total of 68 hours, with the southern eye wall planted over Grand Bahama for about 30 hours. Much of Abaco, as we knew it, is decimated and no longer exists. Flood waters in the streets made them appear like the ocean. Concrete structures were turned to dust, as if a massive bomb had exploded with atomic force. There are no words sufficient to describe this tragedy. East Grand Bahama has been laid to waste. Freeport, West End, and much of Grand Bahama experienced horrible destruction. No living Bahamian has ever seen anything like this in their lifetime. But as horrible and vicious as Hurricane Dorian was, the bravery and resilience of the Bahamian people is even more powerful.
In Guyana, the government is moving to the courts to ask for a stay in the decision by the Elections Commission, GCOM, to merge the data gathered from the recently completed house-to-house registration with the existing National Register. Attorney General Basil Williams says later on Thursday he will file the order in a legal bid to temporarily stop that decision. The AG had already appealed part of an August 14th order, which said that GCOM should not remove the names of any person currently on the National Register. Guyana's AG also addressed the issue of overseas voting in the country's general and regional elections. He says while the matter was not argued before the acting Chief Justice in the recent challenge to house registration, her ruling that the names should not be removed from the list suggests that overseas voting exists.
So only citizens resident in Guyana could vote in Guyana. And the Constitutional Reform Commission Act of 21 persons, 18 voted in favor that for only citizens resident in Guyana was voting in elections.
Trinidad and Tobago's first woman Senate president in Dr. Linda Babubul has died. Babulal, who led the Senate between 2002 and 2007, passed away early Thursday morning. She had been reportedly ailing for some time with pneumonia. She was 78. Dr. Babulal was also the first woman chairperson of the ruling People's National Movement Party and had held several ministerial portfolios, among them social services and health. She leaves behind a legacy of integrity and goodwill, having been associated with many charities, especially the Mount St. Benedict Drug Addiction Rehabilitation Center. Ecuadorian paraplegic athlete Sebastián Suco Carrasco has achieved his goal of climbing Africa's highest mountain on a handbike. Carrasco, who is paralyzed from the chest down after a climbing accident years ago, reached the summit of the almost 5,900 meters high mountain, Kilimanjaro, in Tanzania. The athlete used two special so-called handbikes to reach the top in 6 days, which only took this much time because he had technical difficulties with both of his bikes. Congratulations on that achievement. Coming up after the break, Nigerian citizens fleeing from xenophobic attacks in South Africa arrive home. More details coming up. Stay with us.
Infested by inequalities, abuse of power, and injustice. The American journalist Abby Martin covers the struggle for fundamental rights worldwide.
The president's wish was to be buried in his rural community, while the government is reportedly insisting on burying him at the country's heroes' shrine. Mugabe's nephew said the family is being coerced to go against his wishes. He adds that his uncle died a bitter man because his party betrayed him.
I spoke this morning with Amai Mugabe. She instructed me to issue a statement, to disseminate a statement that she and the immediate family had put together. The statement is that they are being coerced by Emerson Mnangagwa to ignore President Mugabe's wishes on where his mortal remains should be interred.
The newly appointed Sudanese government have charted a roadmap for peace with rebel leaders. The two sides signed the initial deal after 3 days of negotiations in Juba, capital of neighboring South Sudan. They have agreed on a roadmap aimed at ending war in the country by year end. The two sides also agreed on trust-building measures, which include the unconditional release of all war prisoners arrested following the ouster of former President Omar al-Bashir in April.
We assure them and the people of Sudan in general that all the suffering and the killing and marginalization will end, And we will pay all the costs to stop the damage of war and bring the peace and remove the marginalization.
The South African Police Service has published the country's crime statistics for 2018-2019, showing which types of criminal activity have increased and decreased in the past year. The statistics cover 21 crime categories, 17 of which are reported by the public and 4 of which are as a result of police activity. A total of 2.01 million crimes were recorded in 2019, down from the 2.09 million recorded in 2018. Murder, being one of the more serious crimes, increased by 3.4%. Nigerian citizens who have volunteered to go back to their country fleeing from the xenophobic attacks in South Africa have arrived home. The almost 180 Nigerians arrived in the commercial capital Lagos on Wednesday evening aboard a private Nigerian airline. Their repatriation comes after deadly violence targeting African migrants left at least 12 people dead in the cities of Johannesburg and Pretoria. According to the Nigerian government, more than 600 Nigerians are set to leave South Africa in the next few days.
I think it's a shame that in the African continent we still have a situation of blacks killing blacks. It's not something that any African should be proud of. I think it should be embarrassing to us all as Africans. As our president has said and he has been showing, we will continue to preach love, brotherliness and unity. So we just appeal to the South African government to show the political will to stop these killings. And one of the ways to do this is ensure that there are consequences for action.
The U.S. Supreme Court has ruled to allow the Trump administration to enforce nationwide restrictions that would prevent most Central American immigrants from seeking asylum in the U.S. In fact, it bars almost all immigrants from applying for asylum at the southern border. This means Trump's asylum restriction will remain in place until the underlying legality of the rule is determined at trial. This judgment temporarily halts a lower court ruling that had blocked the new asylum policy in some states along the border. Jordan's foreign minister has called Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's plan to annex Key West Bank territory catastrophic.
We warn that this catastrophic announcement will curb not only the two-state solution, where the whole world agrees that this is the best way to bring about peace and stability, but also will kill the people peace process and will destroy the basis of peace efforts generally.
There are only 2 northern white rhinos left in the world, but now scientists have successfully fertilized 2 embryos, which might help save the species. The 2 embryos are now preserved in liquid nitrogen and will be transferred into the 2 female northern white rhinos living in Kenya for surrogacy. The animals Najing and Fatu are currently under 24-hour guard on Old Pejeta Conservancy. The last male northern white rhino died last March at the age of 45.
These are the last 2 remaining girls, and we need them to reproduce. And to make them reproduce is by the scientific method. So we need to put more effort on that. Yeah, we need a collaboration of all people to make sure these animals, they're not going to an extinct at some point.
And with that story, we've come to the end of this news brief. These and other stories, as always, find them on our website at telestudenglish.net. And also join us on social media. We are on Facebook, on Twitter, and on Instagram. For Telestud English, I am Estefania Bravo. Thank you for watching.
The life is full of moments. Moments of fight. Moments of hope. Moments that transcend. Moments that you can live in.